Hi everyone, it's Jess. Since it's Pride Month, we're talking about coming out. This week, I'll be talking about what it is like to come out as an adult. My story is quite different because I actually came out a long time after I'd actually started to transition medically, and my social transition, so when I had to actually tell people, was a lot later on in the process for me. In March of 2007, I came out unwillingly as questioning to my partner at the time. If you've watched my story, you'll know that this wasn't really a choice of mine, but rather was just a situation that I found myself in quite unexpectedly. It's on the list because this is the first time I came out as anything when I said, you know what, actually I think there is something that I need to think about here. But to me, I don't think that this particularly counts in my journey as coming out because I didn't choose it. I didn't choose to come out. I didn't decide now is the time where I'm sharing something with someone. It was almost thrust upon me. We were in the middle of an argument about my cross-dressing, which she had recently just discovered. She asked, "Are you trans?" And I said, "No," and then later felt weird about it and had to come back and be like, right, okay, it's a maybe, I don't really know, and I think I need to get some help and guidance to guide myself through this. So that same month, I had my first counselling appointment. I sent her an email initially, but I told her I had been cross-dressing and I wanted to explore what that meant and whether that meant I was transgender, that there were a lot of sort of issues surrounding that I had questions about and I needed someone to talk to about it. So I went along to my first session and I kind of had to sit there and say it, except I didn't use the words for maybe the first 3 sessions. I didn't say cross-dressing, I didn't say transgender. She got the gist of things from my email and we went from there using roundabout ways of talking about it. And it wasn't until my 3rd session or so with her where I said cross-dressing and that's what it was and that was what I was there to explore. I don't think I used the word transgender for a long while after that, but that was definitely for me one of the big things to come out as and say, yes, this is something I enjoy doing, and also I'm questioning my gender as a result of that. I went to my counsellor for a few months and I actually started to feel like I needed to talk to someone else about things as well. I needed to have a more sort of social support network, and I'd been talking about things with my partner at the time, but those conversations were very difficult because of the potential impact that they would have had on our relationship. So that was hard to discuss and hard for us both to talk about without feeling mad or biased or angry or upset. So I really started to want to tell someone. It was June, July time of that year, so 2017, when I came out to my very close friend from university. I sent her a WhatsApp message saying, I am starting to question my gender and I'm trying to figure out who I am and whether I'm transgender or not. This was a super landmark moment for me in my transition journey because she was the first person that I willingly told. Even with my counsellor, I still had this feeling inside that you have to do this, you have to talk to someone, so you have to tell her. Whereas Vanessa was the first person I chose to tell. And that was huge. She was amazing about it. We had this really involved conversation. She had a lot of questions. She was so supportive immediately. I actually wish I still had this conversation because it was so meaningful and something I still think about from time to time, just how amazing she was. Unfortunately, it got lost in changing devices, and it was nice to be able to just talk about it with a friend. I think she was the first person I showed a photo of me dressed up all girly too, and she was so nice and complimentary and supportive. She still is. It made everything a lot easier because suddenly now I did have a friend to talk to. I had my friend that I could talk about it with, the professional who I was getting help from. Now, while that was really nice and really nice to have, it drained me so much more than I ever thought that it would. There's another friend that I'm quite close to. We sort of hang out, the 3 of us, all the time, and I'd wanted to tell her around the same time, but I couldn't feel able to. It just took so much out of me to say it and to say to someone. Even at that point that I was just questioning, that was still a huge thing and it drained me completely. So I didn't tell her immediately, much as I wanted to. It actually took a couple extra months before I told her. Again, she was great and she was amazing as well. Ever so slowly, I'm starting to build up this small network of social support of people that I can talk to about things and who are there for me. So on October 13th, 2017, that's the big one. That's when I come out to myself as transgender. That's an important part of this, coming out to yourself. Because for me, this label has always been self-determined. I never spoke to someone who said, you have gender dysphoria, you're probably transgender. My counsellor wasn't like that. It wasn't that style of counselling. She was there to provide me someone to talk to and to talk things through with and to ask me questions, but not too many. She would never have been the person to say, you are transgender. It had to be a self-guided journey for me. So this was a huge one. This was a huge moment when I sit back and I realize, no, this is who you are. I know I talk about this in my story, but I was literally sat at my computer, just clicked. It just made sense. I think for something like this, especially as an adult, you have to have that moment where you come out to yourself and you say, right, this is who you are. This is who you've always been. Immediately after that, I had to come out to my ex. There was no way that I couldn't tell her. We'd been through so much that year. It had been such a very long, drawn-out process of unknowing and uncertainty for both of us. And I didn't want to keep doing that to her for any longer than I had to. So, although I probably should have taken some time to really let it sink in and digest. At the time, there was a lot more uncertainty than there is now, but I just needed to say it. I needed to tell her and I needed to let her know. So unfortunately, we broke up and that sucked. I really, really needed someone to talk to. On that day, that very day, literally that moment, I came out as transgender to the close friend who I'd told initially. The first person who I told I was questioning was also the first person outside of my relationship who knew that, yes, I was trans. So I sent her this message. It wasn't as much of a shock for her because she'd known I was questioning, but it was still a big thing and she was amazing about it, and I couldn't have asked for a better reaction and a better friend. You'll note at this point that I haven't talked about family at all, because at this point in my life they didn't know. Since they didn't know that I had been questioning and they didn't know that I'd come out to myself as trans, when that relationship ended, I didn't tell them anything. I didn't tell them why it had happened. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, when your child's almost 6-year relationship ends out of the blue and they're not telling you why, you can start to be a bit worried. Not in a personal I have to find out way, but just because I hadn't told them anything about it. And they were so worried about me because I just wasn't talking to them because I felt like I couldn't, that they didn't know the prerequisite information for me to be able to talk about my breakup honestly with them. So I just didn't tell them anything. That went on for a couple of weeks and it really took its toll on both of them. Eventually this started to take its toll on me as well. I was lying. I almost said not lying. I just wasn't telling them, but I was lying to them and not telling them something very, very important about me. Because I was still so scared. Because you can love your family and you can know your family and you can know the kind of people that they are. But there are too many horror stories out there of people who come out as trans and suddenly it's like they don't have a family anymore. And you just never know how people are going to take it, which was really, really upsetting, an upsetting position to be in, because you want to talk to your family about it and it leaves you feeling like a bad person because you don't know if you can trust them. When it's not that at all. You're just trying to protect yourself and make sure that you're ready. And it wasn't a good couple of weeks for me. It was so stressful. My mum had been wanting to see me and wanting to have a catch up over some coffee, sort of to make sure that I was okay. So we finally got to sort of meet up. I think it was the first week of November in 2017. I remember because it was almost bonfire night and we were talking and the subject came up because of course it does. It's the first time I've seen her since the breakup and I hadn't gone in there with a plan. This wasn't an earmarked day for telling her anything. I hadn't intended to tell her that day. But we were talking and I realised that I just wanted my mum. I'd been dealing with so much that year. It had been a long year trying to figure all this stuff out. And I had my friends, and up until we broke up, I'd had my partner, and she'd still been good about supporting me after we broke up. But sitting across that table from her, I felt so alone. And I just wanted her to help. Because even though there was nothing she could do, I just wanted her to hug me and tell me that everything was going to be okay. So I knew I had to tell her. I hadn't prepared for it. I hadn't worked out what I was going to say, which, if anyone knows me, I plan a lot of things to death a lot of the time. So to go into this without a plan wasn't in my comfort zone anyway. So I tell her that I want to talk about it. I used to live in the centre of Southampton. She used to live outside of Southampton, and I wanted her to be in a good place to find out. I didn't want to come out to her in this hotel restaurant. So we went back to her house, the place I grew up, where I used to live. It was the longest car ride, I think, of my entire life. It's like a 20-minute journey, but sitting there in the passenger seat while she's driving us to her place. I was very quiet. I don't think I said a word the entire trip. But we get to hers, we sit down on the sofa, and she looks at me, and I won't forget this because it made me laugh so much. She said, "Don't worry. Whatever it is, it's okay. You'll always be my son." And I literally laughed. I couldn't help. And she must have thought I was being dismissive of her. And she was like, no, really, I'm always here for you. And I was like, well, it's not that. And she was like, well, what is it? And so I said, what it is, why we broke up, is that I'm pretty sure I'm transgender. I still, in that moment, said pretty sure, because hedging my bets is a thing that I do a lot. But this was a huge thing, and I wanted to have some leeway. I don't know why. It just made sense to me at the time. So I said, I think I'm transgender. I've been talking to a counsellor since March, but this is who I am. And she was so shocked. Not in a bad way. She was just taken aback, and she took a second to process it. And we hugged, and she cried, and I cried, and she had some questions that we talked about. But it went so well. So well. And that was a huge sigh of relief to know that I wasn't going to be losing her from my life over this. Not that I thought in any sort of serious danger that there would be, but I also knew that it does go bad for us sometimes. And I had to sit down and tell her that, knowing that that might happen. So to find out that it wasn't was great. That she was still my mum, and that she still loved me all the same was lovely. And I'm so glad that I told her. I still get really emotional thinking about it, because there were a million ways that could have gone, and I'm so grateful that it went how it did. A few weeks later, on November 20th, I told my dad. To come out to my dad, I sent him an email, which I'm not proud of because it sounds quite callous and it sounds quite impersonal, which I regret. I don't have a bad relationship with my dad. I've got a great relationship with my dad. I kind of wish now that I'd told him in a different way, but at the time that was the way that I needed to do it. So while I kind of regret it, in a way I'm a little bit glad that I did the thing that I needed to do the way that I needed to do it. I sent him an email with the subject line, "Some stuff I need to say," because drama, I don't know why. I don't know why I phrased that email like that, but I prefaced it with like, hey, if you're reading this on your phone on the way into the office or to go do something important, please stop right here and read this when you're at home and you've got some time, because this one's going to be a big one. I just kind of went into it. I prefaced it with kind of disclaimers almost, like, look, I'm doing this way because I need to make sure that I get everything down. So I included research. I had a sourced coming out letter and made sure I covered a lot of different parts of it, and to be like, hey, look, be careful of the internet, because right now there's a lot of misinformation about us out there. I still love you, I'm still your child, just not the gender you thought I was. And his response was good. He'd said that through his sister and some of their friends that he'd known a trans woman earlier in life, and so he was a bit more clued up about it than I thought he was going to be, which was good. He used her correct pronouns, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, this is great, this is really promising, this is awesome. So it was, again, another very happy story, which so privileged to say that my family really stepped up. Again, not that I thought that they wouldn't. I feel like I need to keep saying that, but You just never know. And no, they came through for me. Now I'd told both my parents, I felt I could start the medical aspect of my transition. I started taking HRT 2 days later, on November 22nd, 2017. At this point in my life, 6 people know that I'm transgender, and that's it. And I had no plans to tell anyone else. My plan was to keep transitioning medically and eventually socially transition later and hold off telling everyone as long as I could. As a plan, that worked for me for about 7 months. From November through till May, I was just taking my pills every day, but eventually I'm starting to show a little bit. My chest is starting to develop and I'm about to start laser hair removal. At the time, they'd forewarned me that it could leave my skin quite red for a few days, and I didn't want to have to explain that. I hadn't told my sister yet, and I didn't want my workplace to know before my sister did. I asked for my mum's help on this one because I really wasn't in a place where I felt like I could tell her. I don't know why, it just wasn't coming to me as easily as it had been to tell my mum and my dad. The way we settled on it was that I would write her a letter, which my mum would sit with her and read with her so that she could talk to her about it and answer any questions that she had. I used a modified version of the email I'd sent my dad, which I sort of tweaked and corrected. My mum actually marked it because she's such a teacher, so it came back with spelling corrections all over it, which I kind of loved, to be honest, so I fixed it and sent it off to her. So she sat down with my sister one day and read it to her, and again it went really, really well, and we talked about it via email over the next few days. I'd been really apprehensive and anxious on the day though, the day that she was due to read it, and this is actually what prompted my coming out at work. I'd been so anxious about it that other members of staff had actually noticed. They'd noticed that I wasn't right, that something was bothering me, and I wasn't able to talk about it, but they could tell that something was up. So now my sister knew. I didn't feel like I had any excuse, that I should start working on the next obstacle, which was work. You need to tell work. Your anxiety at work over this got so bad that they noticed. You're about to start having potentially a red face every other week or so. Your bra strap is showing out under your t-shirt occasionally and it's about to hit warmer weather. You need to tell them, or otherwise they're going to find out and it won't be on your terms, was my rationale. I came out to some people who I'd been talking to from Tinder, of all places, to try and test the waters of how a stranger would take it and how telling someone could go. I was kind of, I don't know, I think I might have been fishing for a bad reaction to try and get one out the way to build some strength about it, because at the time I hadn't had one yet and I was like, bound to be one coming, right? So let's see how you take this. Unfortunately / incredibly fortunately, both of them were amazing about it. I still talk to both of them. One of them in particular has done so much for me and constantly denies it, but she knows who she is. Thank you. But it started to give me the confidence boost that actually this would be okay. So I sent an email, because of course I did, because it's 2018 and just do everything by email. So I sent an email to someone who I worked with, a colleague, and asked for her advice in telling my director, the sort of main boss. I was very sort of to the point. I was very much like, look, right, okay, here's the situation. I was really anxious the other day because I'm transgender and that was the day that my sister was finding out. Please help me tell the boss so that we can just move on and I can just keep transitioning without having to worry about this on a day-to-day basis. I emailed someone who is 2 desks away and I am not a very brave person. So I left the room because I didn't want to see the reaction that anyone got to this. I stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes, I think, just sort of breathing slowly, going, oh God, this is really happening. Fortunately, she sent me an amazing reply. She was very understanding and said that she would of course help. She was moved by my story. So she actually told him for me, which was fantastic because one less person I had to tell. And then he took me out for a drink at lunchtime on, I think it was a Friday. We just went for a drink and a catch up so that we could talk about it. And he was like, first of all, your job's absolutely safe, obviously, because that had been something that I was worried about. Because again, you can be pretty sure that you know people and you can be pretty sure that you know companies, but when it's your life and your livelihood on the line, you're a bit worried. You're like, okay, how are people going to take this? But he was very, very reassuring and said, look, if there's anything that I can do to help, anything at all. He offered me so much support in that moment. It was really, really amazing. He asked how I wanted the company to find out. whether that would be from an all-staff email, whether I wanted him to tell them, whether I wanted to be the one to do it. And we'd gone out for a drink at lunchtime and I had a large glass of wine and I hadn't had anything to eat that day. So I was a little buzzed, shall we say, and in that moment I just found some confidence. I'm drunk on a Friday lunchtime. Probably not going to be a better situation to do this. Why not? So we called an all-staff meeting. The second of the day, actually. We'd had one in the morning and I made everyone reconvene. So my boss headed the meeting and handed over to me. And I just said it. I just sat in front of the company. Everyone turned to look at me. And I said, so I'm transgender and I'm transitioning. I've been transitioning for 7 months. Please use they instead of he. And if you've got any questions, let me know. And they were great. A couple of people were quite shocked, you could see it on their faces, but everyone was positive and supportive. It was a member of staff's first day, so that was great timing. So we made some jokes with her and we're like, look, this doesn't happen every week. And we got back to work and they did everything I asked them to. New staff were informed during their sort of briefing process when they started the job, and no one gave me any trouble about it. They handled everything well, even my weird, slightly buzzed coming out on a Friday lunchtime. On that day, riding the high from telling the company, I actually decided to come out on Facebook as well and tell everyone in my personal circle. It was around Pride Month, so for me, Pride Month always has strong connotations with coming out and being proud of who you are, and this was my step towards that. I came out to those people and such an outflowing of support and positivity from people I hadn't spoken to in years, who saw my status and were moved by it and wrote me personal messages of congratulations. They were really lovely about it, and it was really nice. From something that, if you followed my story, you'll know that I always felt quite ashamed about. To have pride in it, to have these wonderful messages coming in, and to start feeling good about something that, even while I was coming out and then coming to terms with and beginning my transition, I was desperately trying to hide because I hadn't felt ready to tell people, and it still left me with this feeling that I was doing something wrong or something shameful. Because you kind of just do whenever you're hiding something that much, whenever you're making sure that every single moment of every single day you're being guarded with who you are and what you're going through because you can't tell anyone. It does leave you feeling like that's a bad thing and with some negative feeling towards it. And this was a huge, giant personal step in just obliterating that sense of shame. I went from 8 people knowing I was trans in the morning to basically everyone on my Facebook friends list and an entire company worth of people. And after that, it was some small milestones. So I came out on Instagram on National Coming Out Day 2018. Small hints about it had been creeping through into my stories and pictures from the year. A couple of times I'd got lovely comments who were like, oh, those nails in that story are nice. Whose nails are those? And I'm like, mine, thank you. Without any further explanation. But eventually I come out, I put up a post, a heavily Snapchatted picture. This is where a lot of my wider family found out, which I really should have done better for them in telling them and making sure that they knew, but I sort of forgot that they followed me on social media and that Instagram, you didn't have to accept people to follow you, so I kind of forgot, and if I had remembered that they followed me on there, I think I would have done things very, very differently. As it was, this just felt like something that I could do with no consequence. And it was great. Again, more outpouring of support. At the time for me, coming out was always a very intentional move. It was something I needed to do. I wasn't presenting femininely on a day-to-day basis. I wasn't wearing makeup outside. I definitely wasn't wearing dresses outside. For the most part, if people didn't know I was transgender, they didn't notice. It was always hard to know how people would take it. At the time, I still looked very, very, very masculine. So I could get away with not telling people. Whereas now, things are a lot more obvious. For me, now, coming out is a process that happens to me literally every single time that a stranger sees me. I wear women's clothing. I wear makeup a lot. I wear dresses. My name is Jessica. Coming out now is just something that happens when people hear my name, see me, and I don't have any control over the process anymore. It's just something that happens. Shop assistants, bus drivers, everybody that I encounter in my life, I'm effectively coming out to with my presence and the way that I look. I never could have believed that I would get to this point when I used to agonize about telling one person, but now walking into a crowded room or a club in a dress and makeup is doing the same thing on a bigger scale but doesn't seem like a big deal at all. Because I found that pride in myself. I found that pride and that power in knowing that all the people who I've told and wanted to tell were there for me, and everyone else can just deal with it. I'm far more proud of who I am now than at the beginning of this transition process. I really found my pride through coming out to people and having fantastic reactions. I don't want to paint a dishonest picture of it though. There really is the possibility that it could not go well. And if you're someone that's worried about that, or thinking about, I want to be part of Pride Month, but I don't want to tell anyone and I'm not ready yet, it's okay to not be ready. For me, at each and every stage, I knew deep down that I was ready. That yes, now is the time. And I did absolutely everything on my own timescale. For some people, the gaps between telling the previous person and telling them has been longer. Some people I came out to, like with work, in a very compressed period of time. It took me months to tell my sister. It took me a couple of weeks from telling my mum to tell my dad. Never ever feel rushed or pressured or pushed into doing anything relating to coming out that you don't want. I'd been talking with my mum initially about telling my sister, and she'd wanted me to tell her in person, and I had to say to her, I don't want to do it that way. And you have to be careful that you're doing the things that you need in the way that you need them. If that means telling one friend on 1 week and another friend months later, that's what you do. People shouldn't come out until they're ready. And only you can know when that is or how that you want to do it. Finding your own way and your own words and your own voice is the best way to know that you are ready. When I was writing the letters to my dad and to my sister, I knew, from putting the words to the paper, I knew that I wanted to share it with them. There were a few times when I almost came out to people before I actually did, and I would be sitting there and I'd be trying to put the words together and they wouldn't be coming and they wouldn't be flowing and it wouldn't feel right. And that's how you know, and you just have to listen to that. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have any comments about today's video or my coming out story, then just drop them in the comments below. Bye!